Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 11, text 46 through 50. So this chapter, at least much of it, has been concerned with the associates of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And basically, it's a list of pure Vaishnavas. So even just hearing their names is very auspicious. We may not know much about them, but they were all 100% dedicated to the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda. And it's explained in Chaitanya Bhagavat that they were all qualified spiritual masters, liberated souls. So just when we hear their names, we just have to try to bear in mind that these are all eternal associates of the Lord who descended just to help him execute his pastimes. Just as when Ramachandra appeared on the earth, all these great personalities, this is always the case. Whenever the Lord appears, all these great associates appear with them to help him execute their pastimes. So none of them are ordinary. In fact, you had all these great devas and great sages taking the form of monkeys in Ram's pastimes. These super powerful apes, and sometimes gorillas, even bears. So it's a little bit analogous to Prabhupada one time made this joke that he'd spread this movement with bears and monkeys, referring to as some of us. Dancing white elephants. We were called a lot of animal names, I think. Because, anyway, so when the Lord appears, he appears with his entourage, with his associates. So I'll read the initial verses and then we'll chant the 50th verse. The 32nd, 33rd, 34th, and 35th prominent devotees were Narayana, Krishnadas, Manohar, and Devananda, who always engaged in the service of Lord Nityananda. The 36th devotee of Lord Nityananda was Hoda Krishnadas, whose life and soul was Nityananda Prabhu. He was always dedicated to the lotus feet of Nityananda, and he knew no one else but him. Purport: the residence of Krishnadas Hoda was Badagachi, which is now in Bangladesh. Text 48. Among Lord Nityananda's devotees, Nakadi was the 37th, Mukunda the 38th, Surya the 39th, Madhava the 40th, Sridhar the 41st, Ramananda the 42nd, Jagannath the 43rd, and Mahidara the 44th. Purport: Sridhar was the 12th Gopal. Text 49. Srimanta was the 45th, Gokuladas the 46th, Hari Harananda the 47th, Shivai the 48th, Nandai the 49th, and Paramananda the 50th. So text 50, which is on the board. Vasanta was the 51st, Navani Hoda the 52nd, Gopal the 53rd, Sanatan the 54th, Vishnai the 55th, Krishnananda the 56th, and Sulochan the 57th. Purport: Navani Hoda appears to have been the same person as Hoda Krishnadas, the son of the king of Badagachi. His father's name was Hari Hoda. One can visit Badagachi by taking the Lala Gola Gata railway line. Formerly the Ganges flowed by Badagachi, but now it has become a canal known as Kalshira Kal. Near the Mudagacha station is a village known as Shaligram, in which King Krishnadas arranged for the marriage of Sri Nityananda Prabhu, as described in the Bhakti Ratnakara Taranga 12. It is sometimes said that Navani Hoda was the son of Raj Krishnadas. His descendants still live in Rukunapur, a village near Bahiragachi. They belong to the Dakshina Radhya Kayasta community, but having been reformed as Brahmanas, they still initiate all classes of men. Vasanta Navani Hoda Gopal Sanatan Vishnai Hajara Krishnananda Sulochan. So, these great personalities are named. There's some few elements of description, but not a lot. I was reading from the Chaitanya Bhagavat, and there's a nice section here, very nice section, and some other things. I was thinking, when I try to give a class like this, I think, what am I going to say about this? So I tend to just think of a lot of other things to say about other things. So that's what I'm going to do today. Probably I might be all over the place a little bit. Just different things that have come up in my readings and discussions with other devotees. So this is from Chaitanya Bhagavat, chapter 5. And he's talking about the different devotees and servants of Lord Nityananda. That is to say, Vrindavan Das Thakur is talking about them, who has been described by Kaviraj Goswami as the Vyas of Chaitanya Lila. So he says, I am unable to write about all the servants of Nityananda Chandra even in 100 years. Each of those servants had thousands of followers. They all accepted Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda Prabhu as their wealth and life. By the mercy of Nityananda, they were all qualified spiritual masters. They were all greatly intoxicated by the mellows of love for Lord Chaitanya. The interesting word that he chooses, intoxicated. If you think about what it would be to be intoxicated with love. Intoxicated in love. Sometimes on the mundane level, people get somewhat... I remember in the film Bambi by Walt Disney, they talked about people becoming Twitter-pated, which is, kind of an intoxicated state of attraction. But of course, that is the perverted reflection. But these personalities, if you see an intoxicated person, you say, oh, they've had too much, whatever it is they've been taking. Because their behavior is a bit strange sometimes, or seems sometimes whimsical or strange or even bizarre. So, being intoxicated with love means that they may have behaved in sometimes an eccentric manner, just as Nityananda Prabhu was, you could say, the king of eccentrics. In terms of his behavior, in fact, he was criticized, which was discussed in this next chapter, chapter 6 of Chaitanya Bhagavat. There's a description of how certain people had doubts about Nityananda because he behaved in such an unusual way for someone who was supposed to be a renunciate. And he was criticized. And this Brahmin, who had great regard for Lord Chaitanya, went to him and privately asked him, I don't understand this Nityananda. He behaves very strangely. And then Lord Chaitanya replies in an amazing way to describe how these great personalities cannot be viewed the way that we view ordinary people. Anyway, so he says, they were all greatly intoxicated by the mellows of love for Lord Chaitanya. I have mentioned only those whom I know. The others will be described by Vedavyas. Well, now he's supposed to be Vedavyas, but he's saying that Vedavyas will have to do it. So that means in some other appearance, Vedavyas will describe their glories. He says, the last of his servants is Vrindavan Das. He took birth from the womb of Narayani, who was the recipient of the Lord's remnants. And the purport, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he writes, the author, Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur, is not identified as a descendant by his paternal line. Rather, he became famous for his relationship with his mother, who was a devotee of Gaura. It is well known that his mother, Sri Narayani Devi, accepted the remnants of Sri Chaitanya Dev. Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur, the son of this Narayani, is the final servant listed of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Even today, the Vaishnavas glorify Narayani as the recipient of Lord Chaitanya's remnants. Accepting Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda Prabhu as my life and soul, I, Vrindavan Das, sing the glories of their lotus feet. So, in this, the chapter that follows, this 5th chapter of Chaitanya Bhagavat, it's titled The Glories of Nityananda Prabhu. So, it explains how this Brahmin who had developed these doubts about Nityananda Prabhu's position didn't understand. He couldn't understand his behavior. And so when he spoke to Lord Chaitanya was able to remove all of his doubts. It describes that when he was in Navadvip, Nityananda was very attractive to some people because of his unusual dress and behavior. It says that he dressed with various ornaments and clothing while accepting sandalwood pulp and flower garlands and while chewing betel nuts with camphor. So this Brahmana approached Lord Chaitanya and said that everyone calls Nityananda a sannyasi, but a sannyasi is prohibited to touch any object made of metal. But Nityananda is always decorated with various gold, silver, and jewel-studded ornaments. He wears fine silk cloth rather than saffron loincloth. He carries an iron rod rather than a danda. He always stays and eats at the houses of Shudras, and as such, his behavior is not seen to be in accordance with the Shastra. Why should a person who is accepted by everyone as a great personality act in a way that is contrary to the principles of his ashram? So then Lord Chaitanya quoted a number of verses. It's a little bit long, the chapter, so I'm sort of just trying to summarize. He quoted verses that establish that the faults that are seen through mundane vision in Uttamadhikari Vaishnavas are not actually faults. So in an ordinary person, they may be faults. In a Vaishnava, they're not exactly faults. He says, Lord Krishna is supremely independent, and as such, he constantly resides and enjoys pastimes within the body of the Uttama Adhikari Vaishnava. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya. So, Bhaktisiddhanta mentions that this is only possible for a non-duplicitous Uttama Adhikari Vaishnava. So, in other words, it's not to be imitated. Oh, yeah, well, if Uttama Adhikaris are, of course, assuming that you're an Uttama Adhikari would be a fall down in the first place. But he talks about Lord Shiva, Rudra, being called Nilakanta, and only he can drink an ocean of poison and still be unaffected. So, it says, by imitating the activities and behavior of an Uttama Adhikari, one's destruction is inevitable. So that means that if we see an Uttama Adhikari, we should follow their order, not necessarily their behavior. Now, this can be confusing at times, but this is the instruction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he describes an incident where someone who had criticized a Vaishnava, all the incredible suffering they had to undergo. So I just was thinking about this theme because it's a theme that is very important in a Vaishnava society, that we have a conditioned tendency to find fault with others. Everybody knows that this is our conditioned tendency, and even we may be acutely aware of it, but at the same time, we sometimes fall into it. whether mentally or outright verbally, when we think, oh, well, this is just an ordinary kind of devotee. He's not a sannyasi, he's not a guru, so it's okay if I, slag him off a bit, as they say in England, slagging. But of course, this is a very dangerous tendency. And it even becomes more prominent sometimes if a devotee undergoes some difficulty or some temporary fall down. And then people think, oh, well, he's had a fall down or she's had a fall down, so we can really let loose on them. And this is, and it may not be the most palatable of topics, but sometimes this is very prominent in our society. Some people that have dedicated their lives to serving Srila Prabhupada and serving this movement have had some, you could say, blip on the radar of their devotional life. Maybe they've even had 50 years of service, and then they had a little difficulty at some point, so everyone wants to write them off or criticize them. So this is a very dangerous tendency. And in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 9th chapter, this verse, Apichet Sudaracharo, Bhajate, this verse that's quoted often, and often misunderstood also. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. So, when we see someone undergoing some difficulty or exhibiting some apparent fault, one should be very cautious to think of them as anything other than an exalted devotee. In the 31st verse, Krishna says, he quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. So even there may be some discrepancy, one should be very cautious about becoming critical of such a person. And there's a wonderful section in the Borijan's book, Surrendered to Me, where he cites Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's analysis of the situation, which is quite startling. So I want to read it to you, and then we maybe can discuss it a little. He comments on these two verses, 30 and 31. He says, one might ask, but if someone is corrupted by such bad behavior, how can he be a sadhu? This is answered. When he says this is answered, he means it's answered in these verses, 30 and 31. He should be considered as such and thought of as a sadhu. He should be considered as an injunctive statement. Injunctive means an order. It's stronger than just a suggestion. It means it's like, this must be done. So it's an injunctive statement. If this injunction is disobeyed, there will be unfavorable consequences. In other words, the evidence for the truth of this is that it is simply my command. So he's paraphrasing Krishna here. It's my command. It's not a suggestion. Then he goes on, well, someone might say, one may be considered a sadhu partially to the extent that he is worshiping you, but to the extent that he is usurping other men's wives and property, he is not to be considered a sadhu. So if he's doing something that's against religious principles, how can you think of him as a sadhu? To the extent that he is doing something for Krishna, okay, but to the extent that he's not, well. This is answered by the word eva, only. He should only be considered a sadhu in all ways, completely. We should never view him as not a sadhu. His determination is completely fixed. I may go to hell or obtain an animal birth because of my unavoidable sinful reactions, but I will never give up my exclusive worship of Sri Krishna. Such determination is praiseworthy. So in other words, if the devotee is determined, despite all of his conditioned tendencies and difficulties, to go on serving Krishna with his heart and soul, then he should always be considered a saintly person, a sadhu. Or she, he or she. But, one may ask, it's nice the way Vishwanath Chakravarti, this is a technique that a lot of the acharyas use. They'll pose a doubt or a question, then they'll answer it. And they'll pose another. So in other words, it's basically having a conversation with your intelligence. You have this doubt? Well, here's the answer. You have this? Okay. So it's kind of like an internal discussion. So he says, but one may ask, why do you accept the worship of such an irreligious person? So they're actually challenging Krishna. The question, the doubt is questioning Krishna. Why do you accept the worship of such an irreligious person? Why do you consume the food and drink offered by one whose heart is contaminated by lust, anger, and other faults? Well, I mean, at least personally, I can really identify with this. And this analysis, is meant actually to give us all hope, but also it's cautionary. So the hope is that even though my heart is contaminated by lust, anger, and other faults, I still have a chance to get the mercy of the Lord. In fact, the Lord is declaring that He will be merciful to us, even despite our faults. So it's a very wonderful analysis. He goes on. So the question is, why would you accept the offerings of a person who has these nasty things in their heart? In response, the Lord says, he quickly becomes religious. This is not expressed as he is going to quickly become, or he will soon achieve peace. Rather, the present tense is used, he becomes or he attains. It means now. He may have this fault, but immediately he is resituated. The Lord continues, this means that immediately after he commits impiety, he remembers me and feels remorse. He thus quickly becomes religious. He thinks, alas, alas, there is no person more fallen than me. I defile the reputation of the community of devotees. Damn me! Again and again, feeling remorse like this, he achieves complete peace and detachment. Well, one may say, so the next doubt. If he actually becomes religious, there can be no argument about such a person. But what about a devotee whose behavior is wicked and who fails to give up his bad behavior throughout his whole life? And maybe we can even identify with that. What can be said about him or her? Always affectionate to his devotees, the Lord responds to this doubt with complete confidence and with some anger. Now, in other words, he's going to reply to this doubt a bit irritated. This is the mood that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving his deep, penetrative analysis of the Lord's intention here. What does the Lord indicate with these verses? So he says, he replies to the doubt with complete confidence and with some anger in the words beginning Kaunteya. My devotee never perishes. Even when he dies, he never falls down. To encourage Arjuna, who is disturbed with sorrow and apprehension over the thought that hard-hearted quibblers who indulge in false logic will not accept this, the Lord says, O Kaunteya, go to the assembly of these disputants, and making a loud sound with drums and cymbals, raise your arms fearlessly and declare my promise. I, Krishna, am the Supreme Lord, and even if my devotee is wicked in his behavior, he will never perish. On the contrary, such a devotee is sure to become successful. Their bad logic will be shattered by this confident declaration. So he says that, that basically he's saying, the Lord's saying, go to an assembly, make a loud sound, he says, with cymbals and drums, raise your arms and make this promise that my devotee will never perish, he will become successful. Their bad logic will be shattered by this confident declaration. they will certainly take shelter of you as their guru. Such is the interpretation given by Sridhar Swami in his commentary. So now he's referring back to the original commentator of the Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami, saying that he has made this statement. So he's saying it's not just me. The other great Acharya, Sridhar Swami, is also saying. But it goes on. Someone may ask, but why doesn't the personality of God himself make this promise? Why does he instead deputize Arjuna to promise? In the same way as the Lord will later say, without a doubt you will come to me. I promise you this because you are very dear to me. Why doesn't he now say, Kaunteya, I promise that my devotee will never perish? Because he says in the verse, Arjuna, you say it. You say it. So the question is, well, why doesn't Krishna just say it himself? If he's the Supreme Lord, why doesn't he just say it? Well, here's the answer. At that moment, the Lord was thinking, I am very affectionate to my devotees and cannot tolerate their being discredited at all. I will often break even my own promise and let myself be discredited. So he says, I don't mind, I'm willing to be discredited myself and break my own promise. To protect, he says, to protect my devotee's promise. So to protect his devotee's promise, he's prepared to break his own promises. So this makes it a much stronger statement. Because those who will hear this, if they hear Arjuna say that this is the case, then he knows that Krishna will have to protect that promise. Just like, I remember when Arjuna made that declaration on the battlefield that when his son Abhimanyu was killed, he said that before this day is out, I will kill, was it Jayadratha? And Krishna said, oh, why have you made such a otherwise I'll enter the fire. He said, I'll enter into the fire and give up my life if I don't do it, if I don't keep this vow. So he made this solemn vow that he was going to do away with. And yet it was known that he'd made this vow, and they made this whole vyuha, this whole formation, so that it was more or less impossible for Arjuna to ever get to Jayadratha. The whole Kaurava army was arranged in such a way that everyone was in front of Jayadratha, surrounding on all sides and with the massive military phalanxes in the front. So Krishna had to take some pretty extraordinary measures to keep that promise. So he says, for example, I will soon fight with Bhishma and discard my own promise in order to protect Bhishma's promise. So this was one of the first times, you remember in the battle, that Arjuna was a little bit reluctant to fight with Bhishma as grandfather, the affectionate relationship. So he was fighting kind of half-heartedly. And Krishna actually entered into the battle and took up the wheel of a chariot and was going to kill Bhishma himself. Then Arjuna finally had to intervene and beg him, no, don't break your promise. Don't break your promise. I'll fight properly. So he had to put quite a lot of pressure on Arjuna in different situations. So he says, thus, atheistic, logical quibblers will only laugh if I now offer my own promise. So he's saying they'll just laugh if they hear, oh yeah, Krishna says, yeah, we know it, how good his promises are. But they will have to acknowledge Arjuna's promise as if it were written in stone. Therefore, I will have Arjuna make this promise. So, I just thought this was a nice meditation on not being critical of devotees. We don't know who these great personalities are. And practically all of us at some point have had difficulties or are having difficulties. So we should be very reluctant. I know, like, for instance, Bhaktivinoda Thakur once said that although I am personally honeycombed with faults, still I find fault in another. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, do not pry into the frailties of others. And he said, if you want to find fault with yourself. So this caution is very important in advancing in Krishna consciousness. Yes, Maharaj. Yeah, Maharaj was just saying that even Jesus Christ said, don't take the log out of your own eye before you try to take the splinter out of someone else's. So this is but we have a conditioned nature, so it's difficult. But if we as long as we commit offenses, either by criticizing Vaishnavas or there are so many offenses, as we know, 10 offenses, and we want to chant the holy name with efficacy. And we want it to be the most effective possible. And if you want to get the best possible effect out of chanting, then you have to be very, very cautious not to commit offenses, especially to Vaishnavas, because this is often the most serious. I wanted to read a little something else. I came across this about the holy name. It's a short discussion. It was part of a much longer discussion, but quite interesting. This took place in 1977 in Mayapur. The issue at hand was back to Godhead had become sort of, I don't know what the right word is, deviated, let's say, somewhat deviated from Prabhupada's purposes for back to Godhead, with all kinds of articles about people saying, oh, how good it is to chant Hare Krishna, it improves your health and makes you more peaceful. And they were writing these sort of watered-down presentations, kind of somewhat mundanely tinted presentations about Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada didn't like it. And it had happened a couple of times over the years, where back to Godhead the editors got a little derailed. And Prabhupada wanted to put Satsvarup back in charge because he knew that he would stick to the line that he had established. Satsvarup Maharaj. So, which is a good example of our theme this morning, I think. He's been subjected to so much criticism, but actually he's such a great soul and has done so much service to this movement. I feel that, anyway, it's a personal opinion, but I feel that he's been overly abused, and he's been an ocean of service to this movement. Anyway, so this is a discussion that goes on the basis about chanting. And so I'll read the names of the speakers as we go along. Rameshwar, what about the idea that you do not have to move into a temple, give up your family and everything, but you can actually chant Hare Krishna in your own home? That idea that it is available to you, Prabhupada says, no, that chanting of Hare Krishna does not mean whimsical. So in other words, he's saying, yeah, that's okay, but it shouldn't be whimsically done. Rameshwar, no. Prabhupada, offenseless. He must be properly initiated. It does not mean that he should not be initiated and chant. That is not the idea. You must be initiated. Either you are a grihastha or sannyasi or brahmachari. Not that without being initiated you'll whimsically chant and the effect will be the same. No, you must be initiated. Adal Guruvashrayam. You must accept the Guru. Rameshwar, if you want to sell some product, you may make so many claims and then the public will buy. So sometimes we quote these psychologists who have done studies that if you chant Hare Krishna, there are some good effects. Prabhupada, good? There is undoubtedly. If you eat something, there will be some effect of eating. But if it is properly eaten, properly made, it will have better effect. That is the idea. Rameshwar, we were thinking that something is better than nothing. Prabhupada, no. Harishari, if you advertise the Maha Mantra, give some material benefit, isn't that an offense? Prabhupada, then that is aparad. Harishari, yes. Prabhupada, that is aparad. Harishari, one of the 10 offenses. Rameshwar, because sometimes when we interview these people who are chanting, they speak from their own realization, and it is not exactly the version of Shukadev Goswami. It is not, but it is their own realization, whatever little bit they have realized. Prabhupada, no, they may chant, but they must understand that the chanting process, that will be more effective. That they must know. Chanting is open. Anyone can chant. But they must know it, that if I chant in the proper process, then it will be effective. Rameshwar, it must be clear to them that the goal is love of God, not something material. Prabhupada, yes. Prema Pumarto Mahan. That is wanted. And this is an interesting part. He says, there is one word by Bhakti... Well, it's all interesting to me, but anyway. There is one word by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Namakshara bahir hai, nama nahi hai. Means simply the alphabets are coming. But that is not nam. So that's quite a strong statement. Namakshara, Hare Krishna. The alphabets are coming out. But it is not the holy name. So in other words, if it's not done in the... For instance, if an impersonalist is chanting Hare Krishna thinking it's him, if someone is doing all nonsense and thinking that this is a good, health benefit, this type of mentality, he says, Prabhupada says, that is basically alphabets. Rameshwar, suppose someone says that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given freely this holy name with no rules and regulations. Then Brahmananda says, we wanted to make a distinction that a non-devotee chanting is different from when a pure devotee chants. Rameshwar, so that distinction should be there? Prabhupada, yes. Rameshwar, we were thinking that somehow this magazine... Prabhupada, no, another thing. He didn't even let him finish. He said, no, another thing. He said, it is aparad. Namno balad yasya hi papa buddhi. Unless he is in the process, he'll think, I am chanting Hare Krishna mantra, so whatever sinful activities I am doing, it will be controlled. Brahmananda, that's the worst offense. Prabhupada, yes, that is a very bad offense. Harishari, so we're actually advertising the process of devotional service, not just simply haphazard chanting. Prabhupada, first of all, we are chanting just to make him a little attracted. Adao Shraddha. So in other words, we're trying to appeal to people. This is a good thing. Please just try this. We don't tell them anything about rules or regulations or any, we just try this chanting. Make them, it says, a little attracted. Rameshwar, just to popularize it. Prabhupada, yes, that's it. Then, if the heart is a little cleansed, then they will understand. It will be effective. But when it is done properly, it will give real effect. Outsiders, those who are chanting, we don't discourage them. Rameshwar, we want them to chant more. Prabhupada, yes, but they must know the science also. So this is Prabhupada's point that the science is how to do it with the maximum effect, without offense. Offenseless, he mentioned right at the beginning. It has to be done offenselessly. One has to know the science if he wants to get the full benefit of chanting. Then Rameshwar mentions, just like this Alice Coltrane, she has done her small part. She was the daughter of John Coltrane, a famous jazz musician, and she made a few recordings in which she recorded devotional songs like Govinda Jaya Jaya and the Hare Krishna mantra. So Prabhupada said that will be a good thing, but when she does it properly, it will be more effective. Because if one does not chant in the process, then gradually it degrades. Offenses will increase. There is that chance. So then I found one of the reference to this principle about if one is chanting with too much aparad, that you're just basically chanting the alphabet, certain letters from the alphabet. This is from the Nam Bhajan by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He writes, and of course, as you know, Bhaktivinoda writes in a sort of poetic way. So might read certain. So he says, one must take shelter at the feet of a spiritual guide who has realized and does see the form swarup of the name. The mere letters forming the name, namakshara, may be had at any place and from anybody. But the profound and unknown truth behind those letters can only be exposed by the grace of a true guru, a pure devotee of Krishna. So he's saying you can get anyone can chant, and they can be had from any place. These syllables, Hare Krishna, that you can get that anywhere. But he says the profound and unknown truth behind those letters can only be exposed by the grace of a true guru, a pure devotee of Krishna. Only such a guru's grace can protect from the 10 offenses. So in other words, if you get the grace of the guru who's giving this mantra, then you can be protected from these offenses, it says. Only such a guru's grace can protect from the 10 offenses. Carry across from the early twilight of Nam Pas, to the pure light of Nam. So, this is a nice statement by Bhaktivinoda Thakur from Nam Bhajan. So I've sort of been all over the place this morning. I apologize if anyone is disturbed. So are there any questions or comments? I think Maharaj and I we can talk about it later, but I think what we've seen, because we've been around a long time, we've seen how sometimes even wonderful. Well, I'll give you an example that I don't think anybody would mind. Help me here now. Who is this? Madhavisa. Madhavisa was a sannyasi who was sometimes called the Emperor of Kirtan by Prabhupada. Called him the Emperor of Kirtan. And he was a very inspirational leader, and he practically caused Australia to become populated with so many devotees and temples and wonderful service. But he had some fall down. And he was so heavily criticized. And Prabhupada criticized the criticizers. He said, you've made it difficult for him to ever come back again into the association of devotees, because you've been so critical of his behavior. So that's another point. And I know that we've both seen devotees that have done wonderful service and then being kind of written off forever because of some temporary fall down. But according at least to this analysis that I was reading by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Sridhar Swami, they say that this is the very completely wrong approach. That these devotees should be considered sadhus despite their temporary difficulties. So that doesn't mean that we just automatically excuse, especially our own fall down. It doesn't mean that it has no significance. But the point is, the significance should be for that devotee to wrestle with, more than it's not so much our business. Our business is to find faults with ourselves and correct our own behavior, not to spend time, in critical unappreciation of great saintly persons. Maharaj, there should be compassion. Maharaj was just saying, for those of you who are out there in TV land or computer land, that if someone is physically injured, you don't laugh at them or ignore them. You help them. You take care of them. Same thing if one is spiritually injured. They should be given help. Then they should be showed compassion and not written off or blasphemed or criticized. So, questions, comments?